Greetings, loyal subjects. It's normal that a queen consort would be buried next to her husband. My mother, for example, lies next to my father, Henry VII, in Westminster Abbey. Edward I lies next to his beloved queen consort, Eleanor of Castile. However, I was married 6 times. So the question is, which of my wives did I choose to be buried next to? And what happened to the other ones? Catherine of Aragon was my first wife. In fact, I was married to her for 20 years, more than all the other wives combined. Problem was, Catherine just would not accept that I wanted a divorce. She refused to accept my arguments that we were never legally married in the eyes of God. She was, after all, my elder brother Arthur's widow. I put forward the argument that it says in the book of Leviticus that a man should not marry his brother's widow. If they do, they will remain childless. We did not, of course, have a son together. Even when I broke from Rome and made myself supreme head of the church in England and granted myself a divorce, effectively, Catherine refused to accept it. She still clung on to that belief that she was the rightful Queen of England. She ended up at a place called Kimbolton Castle. It was an old, medieval, decaying place, full of damp. In all honesty, it was completely unsuited. Catherine knew she was dying. However, such was my anger against her, I still refused her permission to see our daughter Mary. In one final act of defiance, she wrote me a final letter, still believing that she was the true and rightful Queen of England. She died on the 7th of January 1536. When news reached court, myself and my new Queen, Anne Boleyn, dressed in yellow to celebrate. Anne, in particular, was relieved. There was now no one who could really deny that she was the true Queen of England. Catherine was gone. Then the decision had to be made about where to bury Catherine. Peterborough Abbey was decided upon. It was close to Kimbolton Castle. It was a suitably grand enough building. And, most importantly, it was out of the way. Catherine was buried on the 29th of January 1536, not with the honours befitting a Queen of England, but of a Dowager Princess of Wales, as if she was still Arthur's widow. Over the years, Catherine's grave marker has changed, and now it shows her true status as a Queen of England. What happened to Anne Boleyn? Well, her downfall and execution is well documented. She was executed, beheaded by the executioner of Calais on the 19th of May 1536. There was one stupid omission on the arrangements. A coffin hadn't been provided for Anne Boleyn. So the Constable of the Tower, William Kingston, ordered an empty arrow chest to be brought out of one of the guard rooms, and Anne's body and her head were placed inside the arrow chest. It was taken to the parish church, if you will, of the Tower of London, the chapel of St. Peter Ad Vincula, St. Peter in chains. This was the traditional burial site for the significant people that had been executed either within the Tower, of which there had been few, or up on Tower Hill. Thomas More, for example, was already buried here. and was buried somewhere in front of the altar. However, exact records were never kept. And when repairs were needed to the chapel during the Victorian age, the flagstones were lifted up. There is still massive debate amongst historians about which of the remains that were identified belonged to Anne Boleyn. But she still lies there somewhere in the chapel. Jane Seymour was my third wife, and she was the one that provided me with my long-awaited legitimate heir, Prince Edward. The birth took place at Hampton Court, and initially all seemed well. It was a long and difficult labour, but Jane was well enough in the next few days to sign documents and write a few letters. However, illness struck. What we determined in my day as childbed fever. There was nothing that could be done to save her. Jane died on the 24th of October, 1537. She was taken to St George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, and there she was buried in a vault in the main choir. In 1547, I was to join her. Out of all 6 of my wives, I chose to be buried next to Jane. My 4th wife was Anne of Cleves. The marriage only lasted a matter of months. Unlike Catherine of Aragon, she readily accepted my plans for a divorce. She got paid a handsome settlement in terms of an income and of suitable properties. She actually lived the longest of any of my 6 wives. She was in attendance when my daughter Mary was crowned Queen of England in Westminster Abbey. She even converted to the Catholic faith to please Mary. Anne of Cleves died on the 16th of July, 1557 at Chelsea Manor. She was buried on the 3rd of August, 1557 at Westminster Abbey. She was the only one of my wives to actually be buried in the Abbey, the traditional burial place of the majority of English kings and queens up to this point. Her tomb is said to be hard to find, but it's engraved with her initials and crowns and lions. Catherine Howard was the second of my wives to be executed. She was found guilty of treason by attainder because she incited somebody, namely a Thomas Culpepper, to commit adultery with her. She also failed to disclose to me her sexual past within 20 days of us marrying. Although, to be fair to her, she didn't know she had to, because we only just brought the law in when we wanted to get rid of her. Probably not one of my finest moments. The night before her execution, Catherine Howard is said to have requested the block to be brought to her, so that she may practice laying her head upon it, so the next day everything would go without a hitch. The problem was she was so frightened the next morning she had to be helped up the stairs of the scaffold. You can't really blame her, can you? She was beheaded on the 13th of February, 1542. She was buried the same day, close to Anne Boleyn. When they came to do the renovations in the tower in the Victorian age, it is quite possible that actually Catherine Howard's body was missing. It could be that she was still so young that the bones hadn't yet hardened and they'd rotted away. It could be that out of vindictiveness somebody placed lime over the grave that would cause the body and the bones to rot. Or it could simply be a case of misidentification. Perhaps the body that certain historians believe was Anne Boleyn is in fact Catherine Howard, Or maybe there is a mistake with Lady Rochford, who was executed immediately after Catherine Howard for her role in Catherine's adultery. Catherine Parr was my final wife. She caused a scandal after my death by marrying again just 4 months after I died. The council would never have allowed it, so she married in secret. The gentleman in question was Thomas Seymour. He was the brother of my dead wife, Jane. Catherine Parr had been in love with him for years. And now that I was dead and gone, there was nothing to stand in her way. She fell pregnant, and Catherine and Thomas Seymour moved to his country estate, Sudeley Castle in Gloucestershire. And there she gave birth to a baby daughter that they named Mary, after my eldest daughter. Tragedy was soon to strike. Just like Jane Seymour, Catherine Parr contracted childbed fever. She died at Sudeley Castle on the 5th of September 1548. She was buried in the church within the castle grounds. She lay there undisturbed for almost 100 years. However, during the English Civil War, the castle was being used as a royalist stronghold. When it was eventually sacked by the parliamentarian forces, they devastated the church. This was nothing unusual. Unfortunately, the parliamentarian forces desecrated many churches, cathedrals, tombs and monuments throughout the country. Catherine Parr's monument and tomb were destroyed. At that point, the gravesite was lost. In 1768, an amateur historian, the Reverend Huggett, discovered some documents in the College of Arms that detailed the location of Catherine Parr's grave. He passed the information on to the owner of the castle. In 1782, Joseph Lucas, who rented accommodation within the castle grounds, discovered Huggett's research, and he set about trying to find the grave. He was successful. It was located just a little over 2 feet below the church floor. He couldn't resist. He had to open the coffin. And when he did so, he discovered Catherine's body wrapped up in linen cloth. It was completely uncorrupted. It hadn't yet rotted away. But he couldn't even leave it there. He had to cut open the cloth, and there he revealed part of her arm, which showed that the flesh was white and moist. Over the next few years, the coffin was opened 3 more times. Each time something was taken, either a piece of Catherine Parr's dress or a lock of her hair. These things can still be seen at Sudeley Castle today. The ultimate desecration came in 1792. Vandals broke into the church, opened the coffin, removed the body, and threw it into a rubbish tip. After its recovery, it was buried in a hidden grave. In 1817, the coffin was rediscovered and opened again by the new rector. At this point, the body had rotted away and all that were left were bones. He decided to move the coffin into the crypt. In 1861, the church had been completely restored. A new grand tomb had been built for Catherine Parr, and the coffin was moved one final time. And it is here, finally, that Catherine Parr continues to lay at rest.